Imagine looking at the dollar bill in your hand and realizing that for nearly a century, it simply didn't exist. For the first 86 years of the United States, there was no federally issued paper currency. Before that, during the colonial era, the financial landscape was even stranger. How did an entire civilization build the foundations of a global superpower without the basic tool of modern commerce? The truth is a chaotic, bizarre journey through tobacco leaves, clamshells, foreign silver, counterfeit epidemics, and currency collapses so devastating they shaped the very wording of the United States Constitution. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the early 1600s, when the first English settlers arrived in North America. They stepped off their ships into a world with no banks, no mints, and no hard cash. Back home, England ran on silver pennies, shillings, and pounds, but the British Crown had absolutely no intention of shipping precious metal currency across the Atlantic to struggling colonies. In fact, England actively prohibited the colonies from minting their own coins. The right to issue currency was inseparable from the concept of sovereignty, and the Crown refused to grant anything that hinted at independence. Furthermore, the small amount of gold and silver that did arrive was quickly sucked back across the Atlantic to pay for finished European goods. Local businesses and tradespeople were perpetually starved of hard currency. The colonists turned to improvise, falling back on the oldest economic system in human history: barter. If a blacksmith needed flour, but the miller didn't need horseshoes, the blacksmith had to find someone who needed horseshoes, trade them for something the miller wanted, and then finally get the flour. It was slow, clumsy, and a massive drag on economic growth. To solve this, the colonists turned to commodity currencies, items that held a stable, universal value because everyone needed them. In Virginia and the southern colonies, tobacco became literal money. By 1619, the Virginia colony officially designated tobacco as legal tender. You could pay your taxes in tobacco, settle debts with it, and even buy a wife. When the Virginia Company shipped young women to the colony to serve as brides, the going rate was 120 pounds of tobacco per wife. Tobacco was divisible by weight, but it had massive flaws. It spoiled, it was bulky, and its value fluctuated wildly depending on the harvest. A bumper crop could cause devastating inflation overnight. Eventually, Virginia started issuing paper warehouse receipts representing specific quantities of tobacco stored away safely. It was one of America's earliest experiments with paper standing in for tangible value. Further north, another form of commodity money emerged: wampum. European traders adopted these carefully crafted beads made from the shells of whelks and quahog clams from the indigenous woodland peoples. While wampum held deep diplomatic and spiritual significance for native cultures, Dutch and English colonists treated it as currency. From 1643 to 1660, wampum was declared legal tender in Massachusetts. However, European tools made the beads far easier to mass produce, inflating the supply and destroying its value until the British government shut the system down. While farmers counted tobacco leaves and traders strung shells, a more conventional currency quietly took over American commerce: the Spanish milled dollar. Also known as the Piece of Eight, this silver coin was minted from vast mines in Mexico and South America. It was consistent in weight, reliable in purity, and recognized worldwide. Because English coins were so scarce, the Spanish dollar became the de facto standard in every American port city. To make change, colonists literally cut the silver coin into halves, quarters, or eighths. These eighths were called bits, which is why we still refer to a quarter as 2 bits today. The Spanish dollar was so vital to early America that the Coinage Act of 1792 modeled the official United States dollar directly after it, and Spanish coins remained legal tender in America all the way until 1857. As the colonial economy grew, the demand for money outpaced the supply of foreign coins. In 1690, facing an empty treasury and an angry army returning from war in Canada, the Massachusetts Bay Colony printed paper bills of credit. These were effectively IOUs backed by the promise of future tax revenues. Other colonies quickly copied the idea. By the time of the Revolutionary War in 1775, 14 different colonies had printed paper money. The result was a logistical nightmare. A Massachusetts pound was completely different from a Pennsylvania pound or a Virginia pound. Worse, some colonies couldn't resist overprinting, causing the currency's value to plummet and wiping out the savings of ordinary citizens. The British government grew so alarmed by this chaos that they passed the Currency Acts of 1751 and 1764, banning the colonies from printing paper money. This economic stranglehold became a massive yet often overlooked grievance that helped spark the Revolution. When the Revolutionary War began in 1775, the Continental Congress faced a massive problem. Fighting a global superpower is incredibly expensive. Congress had no power to levy taxes and virtually no credit. Desperate to keep the army fed and equipped, they turned to the printing press, issuing a new paper currency called the Continental Dollar. Initially, each note carried a pledge to be redeemed in gold or silver. But as the war dragged on, Congress kept printing, flooding the economy with roughly $241 million in paper currency. The result was a catastrophic hyperinflation. Prices skyrocketed so fast that a pair of shoes cost hundreds of dollars. The phrase, "not worth a continental," became a standard American idiom for total worthlessness. Shopkeepers wallpapered their businesses with the bills, and citizens paraded dogs covered in tar and paper money through the streets as a joke. By 1781, a continental dollar traded at 1,000 to 1 against actual silver, resulting in a massive government default that ruined countless soldiers, farmers, and patriots. This disaster left a deep, permanent scar on the American psyche. When the delegates met to write the United States Constitution in 1787, they were determined to prevent another paper currency collapse. Consequently, Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution explicitly prohibited states from printing bills of credit or making anything other than gold and silver coin legal tender. The Constitution pointedly remained completely silent on the federal government's ability to print paper money, reflecting a deliberate desire for a hard money economy. In 1792, Congress passed the Coinage Act, establishing the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia. Alexander Hamilton designed a bimetallic standard of gold and silver coins, implementing severe penalties for debasing the currency. Any mint officer caught tampering with the precious metal content could face the death penalty. But a hard money system had a fundamental flaw. There simply was not enough gold and silver to support a rapidly expanding country. The mint struggled to produce enough coins, and international trade frequently caused American gold and silver to be exported or hoarded. To fill the void, private, state-chartered banks rushed in during the early 1800s. These banks began printing their own private paper banknotes, which were promises that the bearer could exchange the paper for real gold or silver at the bank's counter. What followed is known as the free banking era, the Wild West of American finance. By the 1830s, hundreds of different banks were printing their own unique notes in varying denominations and values. A note from a bank in Philadelphia might be accepted at face value locally, but face a heavy discount in rural towns or be worth absolutely nothing if the bank went bust. To survive, merchants had to consult pocket-sized directories called banknote reporters, constantly flipping through them to check exchange rates and spot counterfeits. At one point, there were over 8,000 distinct varieties of paper currency circulating in the country, and roughly 1/3 of all paper money in circulation was fake. This chaotic era intensified after President Andrew Jackson, who deeply distrusted paper money after being ruined by it early in his career, killed the Second Bank of the United States. Without a central regulating institution, states passed lax laws allowing virtually anyone to open a bank. This gave rise to Wildcat Banks, fraudulent institutions located in areas so remote that only wildcats lived there, specifically designed to make it impossible for note holders to show up and demand their gold. Unscrupulous bankers filled kegs with nails and scrap iron, covering the top with a thin layer of gold coins to fool inspectors, printed stacks of beautiful notes, and vanished overnight. This broken, fractured system operated for decades until the ultimate crisis arrived. In 1861, the United States plunged into the Civil War. The massive financial strain of raising and equipping armies completely overwhelmed the old system of gold coins and private banknotes. In 1862, desperate to save the Union from bankruptcy, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act. For the first time in history, the United States government issued a national paper currency that was not backed by gold or silver, but by the full faith and credit of the government. Printed with distinct green ink on the back, these notes were legally mandated to be accepted for all debts, earning them the nickname that changed history, Greenbacks. Though greenbacks faced heavy skepticism, inflation, and political resistance, the federal government's power to levy income taxes and tariffs kept the currency afloat. The subsequent National Banking Acts created a uniform system that finally pushed chaotic state banknotes out of circulation, giving the United States a unified national currency. The story of American money before 1862 is a long experiment in trust. Trust built, broken, and rebuilt again through a painful cycle of trials and failures. The modern dollar bill you use today is the direct descendant of those wartime greenbacks. It has not been backed by gold since 1971. Instead, it is backed by the exact same thing that saved the nation in 1862, a shared promise and the institutional strength to make that promise credible.